personally, I feel like just in life, not just music, I learned that the harder I squeeze for control or for greatness or any of these concepts that we get attached to, the less results I get anyway.
Totally.
And so I feel like you do the work, and then you have, you do the work, you have love and passion and maybe some balance in your life, and then you hope for the best. You have faith.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Why Music Matters podcast. I'm your host, music journalist and musician Jeff Myers. Throughout my life in and around music, I've often asked myself the question, why does music matter? This podcast will attempt to answer that question with the help of musicians, members of the music industry, and music lovers like you. This week on Why Music Matters, I get to hang with my friend Mike Gantzer, guitarist and vocalist with indie jam rock quartet Aqueous, as well as side project The Death Kings. Mike has spent the past decade on the road, and during that period, Aqueous has grown from a Buffalo band to a major player in the world of jam-based music, performing across the country and at prime annual music festivals like the Peach Fest, Electric Forest, and Summer Camp. With Aqueous embarking on a hiatus, Gantzer reflected on the band's first 10 years, the significance of the friendships that birthed the band, and the role that music plays in his day-to-day life. Welcome to Why Music Matters, Mike Gantzer. Mike Gantzer, welcome.
Myers.
Yeah, welcome to Why Music Matters. It's really good to see you. It's good to talk to you. We just got through Cobblestone Live last weekend, right?
Yeah.
Got to see you play a bunch with some different people. That was very cool. Andy Frasco, Doom Flamingo.
Yeah.
Very fun. Anyway, brother, Mike, guitarist, songwriter, singer, producer, with Aqueous for these many years, also with Death Kings, which I hesitate to call a side project. It's just like another project, I guess. We'll talk about all that. But, the purpose of this podcast is to sort of get into why do we do this? Why pursue a life in music? Why does it matter? And when I first met you, we met in an interesting way. I had an assignment to pick a local band, see if you can go on the road with them. And I had just heard about you guys and picked you, and we met and 10 minutes later we were on the road together here.
Yeah.
And we've been friends ever since.
Yeah, it was. I think that in life there's certain people that you meet that you immediately have a kinship with and resonate with. And for me, you were always that. I think you have always shared such a love for music in a way that is so pure and so joyful, and is not a way it's something that is felt as opposed to spoken or seen or represented. And those people, it always ends up feeling like family pretty quick because we can just nerd out all the time.
Totally.
And we did, and for you to just hop in to what I believe was a pickup truck, right?
It was a truck with a trailer in the back.
Yeah. I think our van was going through repairs, or we were between vans at the time, and so it was a really cool experience, and you and I, and you and the band too.
Yeah,
I mean,
everybody
has such love for you and your family, and our connection from that moment on has gone, really far, to the point of even your son.
Yeah.
At an early age, coming out on the road to fill in for our bassist when he was going through a surgery. And, Declan, your son, was 14 at the time.
Yeah.
And, of course, nailed the gig. But,
Boy,
but
that
no,
was fun.
I'm so glad to be here. And I think if there was a person I could imagine having this conversation, a person most suited for this conversation, it would be you. Because, you, like I said, your love for music is just so authentic. And so I'm really grateful to be here.
Right on, man. Appreciate it. Could say the exact same about you. Well, those years, I don't remember how long ago that was, but Aqueous was new-ish at the time. You'd been playing together since high school, right?
Yep.
These are your brothers you grew up with, essentially, right?
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing sort of happened. You know, I feel like I've been saying this a lot. We really stumbled into it, in the sense where we were really just buddies, and music was one of the things we loved. And Mario Kart was another. And at the time, you know, hanging out and smoking weed and skateboarding, and you know, it was just one of many activities.
Being a kid.
Being a kid, right? Because that's the thing. I mean, when I met those guys, I was 14, and we started the band maybe within a year and a half or 2 years later, and so it was high school. And we had no intent other than, it was just like, you know, we were and are you know, nerdy kids from Buffalo, and you know, and we would just get together and jam pretty much every chance we could. All those things would happen on the same night. You know what I mean? We would jam for a while and
then go
hang
skateboard,
out, maybe skate out front, and then play Mario Party or Mario Kart on an old Nintendo 64, and it was something that just developed very organically, and really without any intent other than we just really came to love it. And I know for me, guitar and playing and that camaraderie and friendship that was grown through that medium became larger than everything else in my life. You know, like a lot of my other hobbies fell to the side because I just was having so much fun and felt so aligned with that at that age. And you know, and it's funny when you look back because, and this is something I love about recorded albums, is that they really are time capsules.
Big time.
We started recording, you know, pretty much right away when we were 16 or 17. And, you know, we don't know anything about anything. None of us have any training in music. Everything was just by ear and love. And with literally no goal other than like, this is just fun to do.
Fun, yeah.
And our percussionist, who would be our later drummer, Nick Sonricker, had like a home studio he had built that was, honestly, considering, because this is probably 2009, we're talking about 2010, was, you know, decently, not advanced, but considering his age and, you know, and our lack of experience, we're able to get some decent home recordings, you know. And I think between him and I, we always had a good sort of ear for, you know, just mixing. We were really a product of our influences at that time. But, you know, it's so funny to look back now, 17 years later. I mean, I'm 33, and so much has happened, and it wasn't something I anticipated turning into really anything, to be honest. You know, it was just something we loved. And then all of a sudden, you know, we're doing
bigger festivals and growing, you're touring.
It was like 30 shows a year, and most were local. And then it was like 40 shows, and some were regional. And then all of a sudden it was 75, and then 115, and then 150 plus. And it became more of a national thing. And it was just all these things where, you know, and I think this is sort of a concept in life. Like a lot of times you don't even notice the changes. You know, of course you do, you do in a way, but you're not really able to like reflect on them, like, because you're living them, you're experiencing them, and things are just happening, and you adapt. And so there's not always time to even, especially as we became like a really heavy touring band like that, there's not like a lot of reflection time. You're just trying to exist and figure out I know how to do this. And for us, we had really no point of reference other than the bands that we loved. And then, you know,
got to know, played with, became friends with.
I mean, and some of those bands for us being more in the jam band world were, you know, Mo, of course, because of Buffalo. And Umphrey's McGee, and then, you know, Fish and The Dead and all, you know, and Allman Brothers, and a lot of like the sort of lineage of bands that kind of came before that. There's not even like a necessarily like, you know, jam band, I guess, is the general idea, but then there's all this like subgenre within it, and touching on all kinds of
funk
music.
and R&B and
but I remember seeing Mo at Thursday at the Square, and when it was still on Lafayette.
Lafayette.
And it was the first band I saw that was like doing more than one genre. And, you know, in the sense of like everything, I think when you're at a younger age has to be classified, and it's a big part of your identity. Like whether, you know, like I'm into metal, or I'm a punk rocker,
and I'm a purist. I represent for that.
All these like silly rules that you kind of like get classified by, and then
it's like, but what about Stevie Wonder?
Or any, you know, every piece of music. And I started seeing these bands that would be, you know, to me appeared fearless in their approach of what they were integrating, but still had almost like a rock and roll spirit underneath it. And it really appealed to me because I, you know, as a musician, you know, I connected with guitar as really an outlet to, you know, I think for the first few years escape some stuff that was tough at home, and then it just became a voice that maybe I didn't know how to have in other parts of life, and so it was really important to me. But to start to be inspired by bands that were not closed-minded and seemed to be having a joyous time and really expressing in themselves was really inspiring. And so we were always just kind of following in that path and taking cues from those bands. And like you mentioned, it's cool, to reflect now, because those bands, most of them became, buddies and friends and peers. And that was a weird adjustment too, kind of taking the hat off of being a genuine fan. Like, because you know how it is when you're 16 years old, like they
People are gods to you. They're gods to you.
And then if you're all of a sudden like in a room with them or on a stage with them, like,
they're colleagues then.
And you have to almost reframe them and not in a way to diminish what they meant to you, but just to be like not a freakazoid around them too, because it's hard to like not take that energy, and it's the thing you learn really quick, and I know you know this through your experiences in both playing music and journalism, is people are people. Whether or not they've accomplished things or they were successful or not successful. Like a good, kind people are to me is still like the measure. And
Absolutely.
And it helps to sort of help to like normalize some of these folks a little bit, because of course you look up to them and it's like two things can be true. I can honor that they were a really important part of my path, and I can have that privately for myself. Then I also can just be like, oh, this is just a dude too, that, and everybody, you look at these different paths in life that you can take, but when you zoom out a little bit, it's sort of like, there's so much more commonality regardless of like the thing you do.
Right.
Meaning like I've met people who are like CPAs or in, education or in, any number of jobs. And it's so interesting. Every time I talk to them, fans or whoever, they'll be like very, they'll be like, well, what I do isn't interesting. And I'm like, sir, you probably make quadruple what I make, first of all.
Right, totally.
And not that's the measure.
It's not, of course.
But there's something to be said, I think, about like you, regardless of all of the stuff, like we're all just people, and it's been helpful to really center myself with that as I've made moves forward in life and in my career, because it sort of like takes a little bit of the pressure out of something, and it can go on both ends. Like it doesn't matter if someone hasn't achieved something or if they have, if they're not kind. To me, that like it really is such a bummer, obviously, but like if it's like a musician I really looked up to that is not in touch with their humanity, like for me, that's sort of like a deal breaker in terms of like how I see them. You know what I mean? Not in a judgment way, but just in a way of like it's really not about that. Like if you still have to be a person and you are a person,
right?
So I don't know.
I feel that. Tell me what you think of this, but I feel that immersing yourself in a life of music, a life in music, for me, I always felt that was supposed to get you closer to that. Like what you learned from forming a band with your friends, right? What you learned from finding a voice within that collective. What you learn about respect,
right,
early on, is supposed to plant seeds that then, flourish as you grow, right? And the goal is not like, I need to out-shred everyone or any of that.
Right.
It's all fun. But I mean, the goal is to fulfill, that path for yourself. And that path, the arc of it should, bend toward kindness and being decent to other people. And I always felt that was really music's greatest purpose.
First of all, very well said. And I agree. I think and ideally that's a beautiful place to land. But then you also learn too that everybody sort of, I remember, the actress Elaine Stritch.
Yeah.
Remember her?
Yeah, oh yeah.
I found out about her through 30 Rock and kind of worked backwards because she played Jack's mom on that show. But there was a documentary, so good. But there was a documentary I watched with her that was really interesting. It was very humanizing, and it was her in her older age, like still trying to figure out how to perform and amidst like a lot of health struggles. And she talked about, she said, everyone has their sack of rocks.
Yeah.
And I really loved that because, even when you think about like our perception of someone else being kind or humane or whatever, it's like someone that's out of touch with that is not having a good time. You know what I mean? Like if they're coming off as unkind, or they're being like really demanding, or not, you know, any version of a person that we've all encountered at different points, it's like, you know, that it doesn't, you know, from experience, like it doesn't feel good to be that. We've all had those moments and those days, and I try to remember that, but also like, you know, and to a degree, it's like everybody, no matter what their situation is carrying something or going through something. And sometimes it's hard to, you know, line things up where there's people who have achieved like fame and success that have a whole set of issues that I have never lived or can be aware of, because you can only have that through experience. You know what I mean? And when you think about someone like Taylor Swift or John Mayer, or these people, like really massive artists, like where they can't even, you know, like their level of trust, or like how they can even exist, because there's like this sort of view of people, like, again, kind of going back to like how I viewed my bands growing up, and how I'd probably still view, if I was in a room with John Mayer, I'd really have a struggle with that. Like, you know, he's two things. He's like this god, and then he's just a dude.
He's just a dude.
But, you know, I don't, you know, it's hard sometimes to understand like exactly what people are going through. And so, you know, I think to a degree, you try to just, you know, take people, like meet people where they are instead of where you want them to be. But then also like you figure out where your boundaries exist, and how you can, like, I don't know, be comfortable in a situation, or comfortable with people you work with or don't work with, and all that, you know?
Well, that's well said. You mentioned a little bit earlier that playing guitar and you know, immersing yourself in that, which, by the way, you know, you taught yourself, right? I mean, you had no real schooling, but then when you say self-taught, I never consider that to be I'm self-taught. Like, I'm self-taught at the, okay, you're self-taught, but you're still teaching yourself. It never ends, right? I mean, your music got pretty sophisticated pretty quickly, in my opinion, to the point where, you know, you now, one of your many projects is this very interesting take on Steely Dan music, which is true, you know, the band's called Dirty Work, by the way. Very true to the compositional structure of those songs, but opens up into areas of improvisation and interpretation, and makes it seem incredibly fresh. This is not easy music to play or to wrap your head around in terms of music theory. Yeah.
Yeah, and first of all, thank you. You know, that project is something we did just out of joy, you know, like we're like we're all big Steely Dan nerds in Aqueous, and you know, that was something like, when we can do it, we wanted to, just because, you know, I
mean, we definitely, on that first trip, we're listening to Steely Dan in the van.
Yeah, we were all, the truck where we were sitting upright for 9 hours at a time, and drinking beers.
Yes.
But no, I mean, what you said about the self-taught stuff, I mean, you know, I think any musician is really just a product of, like, we're sponges, you know what I mean? And so there's so many ways to learn and absorb. And I think for me, I was always just listening, you know, and trying to understand like where someone was coming from or what they were saying. And it's like, there's such a spectrum when you think about music, from like technique to expression to, you know, concept to purpose, like, and there's a million different ways to approach it. And yeah, because, you know, you think about someone like Roger Waters or Pink Floyd, and their purpose was message first, music complement that, versus like you can get into a lot of music where it's like music almost for like in a mathematical kind of way, which is also cool. Like there's cool benefit to all of it, and a place for all of it. But for me, it was sort of like, I think the lack of formal education was supplemented with an upbringing that, you know, my dad growing up would listen to a lot of really cool records. You know what I mean? He'd be listening to a lot of prog rock, which for me resonated, but wasn't my, like, the thing I loved the most. Like I felt like there was parts of it that I loved, like we'd listen to Yes records or King Crimson and
stuff still.
Gentle Giant and stuff like that, you know, like stuff that would get pretty far out there, and Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And he would always like talk about like the purpose or the lyrics, and kind of like lit that fire for me.
I love that.
Right. Well, and you and I have kind of like, it's the same thing. We're nerding out, you know, of just sitting down and being like, man, when they were writing this, they were like, you know, this happened and this, any whatever story as a part of the music, but for a lot of us, that part of it is incredibly meaningful.
Yes.
And so, you know, like I did have some education in like concert band with the trumpet, but it really didn't transfer over to the guitar.
Right.
Like guitar felt more like something that was connected to rebellion for me, like in the sense of like I got into it because I was skateboarding, and a lot of the cool music that I loved with skating was sort of simplistic, but had a lot of expression, like a lot of the punk music and stuff, where it really made you feel something.
Everything on Warped Tour was completely that vibe. You know?
Yeah. And growing up on some of those bands, like I just, at least that's where I started, like with what I wanted to do. I just wanted to like get a feeling out or get a feeling through. And then between that and then starting to connect with, I think, you know, if the fringe bands were the prog bands of like the stuff my dad loved the most, the things I was really resonating with was like Pink Floyd and Steely Dan and like Allman Brothers and some of the stuff that was maybe a little bit more melodic and a little bit more lyrical. I loved a lot. And I loved the, like, because if you think about like the punk side of things and the message being kind of the you know, on the forefront, I think that's why Pink Floyd hit so hard, was because every choice they made on those albums was to serve the emotion of the song, and and you can really feel it
indelibly.
Yeah, which is why those are so timeless records. And still, like, and they spoke to, you know, you talk about like kind of a larger conversation or larger concepts. Something like Dark Side of the Moon feels as, you know, accurate and on point today as it probably did. I mean, I wasn't obviously alive when it came out, but like, you know, that record has hit me over and over and over and over since I was a kid.
Keeps applying.
And so, you know, from there, I think you mix that, all of that stuff with like being 16 or 17 and, you know, you're just, there's a tenaciousness or a tenacity around, like when you become obsessed with, at least for me, I was so obsessed with guitar.
We're very much the same that way.
Yeah. And I feel like it wasn't necessarily like, you know, I didn't really have a plan. I feel like, and that's the same thing with Aqueous. I was just always stumbling into whatever felt right. Like it was all just for me sort of listening to, and not even on a conscious level, just sort of like walking towards whatever felt interesting at that time musically. And so, you know, it's like that really hardcore classic rock phase, which was so, you know, so inspiring, because I mean that stuff, most of that stuff is still so timeless, and you take different things from it. And then, you know, going back to the jam band thing, I started hearing bits and pieces of the psychedelia that I knew from the 70s stuff, but then hearing other influences that were almost more from some of the punk stuff or ska stuff. And then I got into Fish, and I was like, okay, there's like some of the Zappa, and there's some of the, you know,
and Little Feat and Genesis, you know.
And then you get to like Umphrey's, and then Umphrey's McGee, and then all of a sudden I'm hearing like Megadeth, and I'm hearing like, you know, a lot of the metal stuff I liked. And so that to me, I think between all of those influences and having ADHD, I was like, I want to do that because it means I can just do whatever I want, and I can do this and then this and then this, and that's kind of exactly
one-stop shopping.
Right.
You can do it all,
and that's sort of how I never really thought of Aqueous as ever being a certain thing, and you know, other than we would just always get together and like write based on what was inspiring at the time, you know. Yeah,
that was interesting because from pretty much the beginning, you kind of made up, you know, your own name for what you did. You called it groove rock, right? Which was, I always thought was very cool because you're differentiating yourself from like, hey, we're a jam band and we, you know, that's all great and everything. But there's so many different flavors in it that make it your own. The common denominator being a willingness to take improvisational chances, right? I'm wondering, you know, from that first time I met you when the band was young and to where you're sitting today, so much has happened. A lot of it great, some of it not so great. How has the role and the purpose that music plays in your life changed, evolved?
That's a great question. I mean, I think one of the biggest changes for me was sort of re-evaluating my own relationship with my identity as a musician versus my identity as a person, a human, a brother, a lover, all of the different roles that we play. And I think for a lot of musicians, myself included, it's very easy to put a lot of pressure on that outlet. to be representative of who you are or what you believe in or all of those things. And I think for me, I really learned that, it doesn't, it's a part of it. It's a part of the expression, but there becomes a point where the riding the wave of the music industry stuff, or not even music industry, but just playing shows, especially if you're improvising a lot, where you don't, what is good or what is accepted is so subjective. And, if you start playing that many nights, like for me, when we were doing 5 shows a week for 6 weeks, 2 sets a night kind of thing, there was a time where I started to get really like, anxiety ridden and depressed because I would have like a quote unquote bad show. And then I'd be like really bummed because it felt like the world to me. You know what I mean? I felt like this like little baby I had to protect, and someone would be like, I loved that show, and I would almost like want to correct them or something because I was like, no, I swear you haven't like heard our best.
You've got to come to a good one,
right? And it's like you realize that we as musicians, we're really just conduits for whatever the energy is in the space or in the room, and it's really not up to us to determine what's good or bad. I mean, you can obviously, you want to show up and be as present as you can, and be open and giving and receiving all the energy that's in a space, but I think I see a lot of musicians still and I'm still going through this transition of just finding a healthier dynamic with my value, because the inherent ups and downs of the music industry are, you're going to ride that wave, like where, one night you sell out, the next night tickets, aren't so good, or, your festival slots are moved, all these, there's just a million things. And I think that's not just true of music. I think that's true in life. We seem to put a lot of value on our identities societally, or what we do for work. And, I had to really work with that view I had, and it wasn't conscious, but I noticed when it was starting to get a little bit unhealthy, because I just couldn't maintain that perspective and be out there, and because you care, and it comes from a place of love, but then also I think to a degree it maybe comes from a place, for me at least, of not really giving enough credit to the other sides of myself and my expression, and also just the complete abstract nature of the whole thing. Meaning like, some of the people's, like Aqueous fans' favorite shows were ones where I really thought I did the worst, even though I was trying my hardest. And I had to really start to spend time with that notion, meaning like it's not, there is no right answer, you just, and it's not that serious either. You know what I mean? Like, and we talked about this the other day at your house where what was the quote that your son Declan had? It's not that deep.
Yeah.
I think that's what you said.
It's amazing and it's important, but it's not that deep.
Yes. Right. And it's funny because
it is, but it
isn't. And I love I'm always saying the phrase, 2 things can be true. I think I've already said it once here today, but I'll say it again now because it's like, it is. Like, we can talk about how much it means to us, the connective experiences we've had, the nostalgia, the relationships, all of that stuff. I mean, you can hear a great song and be brought immediately to a memory of someone who's not here anymore, or a relationship you had, or any of these things. And that is powerful and meaningful and deep and beautiful. But then on the other side, like when you're expressing and you're there to, what you said, ideally connect people and share and bring, maybe an authenticity to it, and hopefully just bring people together.
Right.
That does not have to be measured with such an intense grip. And I think a lot of musicians, aren't taught that even. You know what I mean? I know a lot of cats who went to Berkeley or had like a jazz upbringing where it's like the movie Whiplash or something, where it's like, you need to be like this. And I played in bands with people who are from that stuff, and it's hard because they have a lot of anxiety and they have a lot of pressure on themselves to like perform at a high level. And personally, I feel like just in life, not just music, I learned that the harder I squeeze for control or for greatness or any of these concepts that we get attached to, the less results I get anyway.
Totally.
And so I feel like you do the work, and then you have, you do the work, you have love and passion and maybe some balance in your life, and then you hope for the best. You have faith, and I think that's really, for me, that's like maybe the biggest change, to kind of circle back to your question. That perspective was something I had to learn through experience.
Right.
And they say,
a decade of
experience is the best teacher.
Totally. It's funny that so much of the music that we've loved in, across every genre is so much about, it's about this, right? And then we spend our time after we try to, enter into this world going more and more like this, right?
Yeah.
Do you find music that reconnects you to that idea as a listener, that, oh yeah, that's about this, it's about letting go.
Yeah. I mean,
rather than,
Yeah. I mean, I think in terms of music, I love seeing shows.
Yeah.
Because I know sometimes musicians work so much, whether it's locally or you're touring or whatever, that, you need a break from that stuff. So a lot of my musician friends that tour as much as I used to, or that I might still do in the future, they're listening to podcasts or they're listening to silence. You know what I mean?
Right.
And for me, I find when I need to reconnect with some of that stuff, I usually just need to see a show or go hang out with a buddy like you and like maybe watch a concert or just remember that feeling, as opposed to the other side of the fence where you're performing all the time, because they're different roles, but I think it's a bad idea to be too out of touch with what it is to see a show, because you forget that, like, as a fan of a band, you want them to succeed. The audience isn't against you,
right.
And sometimes they are. I mean, I remember being like, I can point to all kinds of moments, like, and I think most of them happened early on, like when you're playing at, like, some of our first gigs were at Pearl Street Grill, and it's like, I know we're pissing the people off that are just trying to eat and have a drink, and we're doing like a 15-minute jam, and like a Lydian jam or something, and it's like, I know that person, like, because they're giving you the look like, shut the fuck up, and I get it, you know what I mean? But, or like if your family's in the audience, or like people, or like I used to have, like, when I back in the day, we talked about this the other day, one of my first jobs that was cool about me going on tour and stuff was working at Best Buy.
Right.
And not that I had any particular skill there, I just, it was a gig.
Right.
And people from there would come see our shows, and it's like so awkward because they know me as the one thing, and like they're in the route, they're like right in front of you, and it feels like there's sort of that, like, I don't know, like that's a tough audience.
You
know what
tough
I mean?
crowd.
Where they're kind of like, they don't really get it, and they're just trying to support you, but you feel very uncomfortable. But I think at the end of the day, it's like in music, ideally, just trusting that, like, if you express yourself authentically and joyfully, like, you can't lose. And that doesn't mean that you'll resonate with everybody.
Right.
You know what I mean? That
can't be the goal. I mean, you're setting yourself up.
It just doesn't exist. I mean, I have to remind myself all the time, like, there's people that hate the Beatles, and there's people that hate all kinds of stuff that I love, and they're not wrong and I'm not right. It's just like, it's sort of, I liken it to, like, like nails on a chalkboard bothers some people and it doesn't bother other people at all, and I think voices are like that, like they're very polarizing for a lot of people, but I sort of just, I know for me, I've really tried to just let go of any cynicism around music, which is hard because, you want to have, especially for you as a journalist, like, you need to have a discerning ear. But also, I think I want to try to continue to work towards acceptance of, if it brings somebody joy and it's not inherently hateful or hurting anybody, or has a message that is maybe something that can be problematic, then, like, fucking just enjoy your life. It's not that serious.
Why would I want to, why would you begrudge anyone something that is giving them joy and making them feel connected to others? Yeah,
and the more I open up too, I find more stuff that I love.
Me too.
Like,
I love way more music than I ever have.
Me too.
And, like, as we get older, it's supposed to go the opposite. Well, not supposed to, but traditionally, your focus narrows and you like the stuff you liked when you were young.
Right.
A lot of it I still do.
Yeah.
Which says more about that art itself than anything else. It means that endures because it continues to speak to me over wherever I'm at stage-wise in life, But we're supposed to, narrow our focus, and I think the goal is to just keep lotus flowering out, I know way more about hip hop and electronic music now than I ever did because I'm interested in it. I know more about classical, and I've always loved jazz, but that's a never ending, and then different, quote, rock music too. It's just it's the best thing about streaming, and it's probably the only good thing about it. Yeah, because it certainly has not been good for artists.
That's true. And I was just going to say, for what it's worth, that's something I always admired about you. I mean, even from the beginning when I met you, which was over 10 years ago now, it's like you were already open. You know what I mean? At least just in your willingness to hear new music, to embrace it, to understand it. And I think that's all it is. It's like, just approaching life and music with a curiosity as opposed to a judgment. It's like, I think we have this inclination, and I think goes back to, like, sometimes like the middle school vibes of like, you don't want to be a poser, you don't want to be whatever. But we let, I think a lot of times in life, we let fear really dictate like our preferences. You know, you don't want to be seen as this or identified with this. And I remember even like 6 or 7 years ago, I posted like, these are my guilty pleasure bands. And it was like Dinosaur Jr. and CKY and all this stuff. And you're like, brother, these are just pleasure bands. You know what I mean? You commented that. And there's no guilt. And I kind of like that is a notion I've really got on board with. Just in general, there is no guilty pleasure. Like just it's being open like that. I mean, it takes a little bit of work, I feel, because it's easier to like judge or to like shut things out or whatever. But man,
exactly what I was hoping you would say.
More when, you know, I find so much more joy and excitement in music and in life, really, when I keep that curiosity open and work at it. Because, you know, sometimes like the world is heavy and people are shitty and it's hard to not be cynical or be like, man, everything's fucked or whatever, you know. But then you reconnect with a friend or an album or, you know, people who do, like you and I have always shared this type of passion, and, you know, you remember like it's for love and it's for joy and it's for connection.
That's why we're here.
At its best,
right?
you know.
Totally.
So that's why music matters.
That's very well said. I'm wondering if you could comment at all on the connection between music, you know, as a player and as a fan, the connection between music and mental health, which that's very broad, but maybe how it can help in our struggles to attain, you know, a healthy state of mind and body. You know?
I'm really glad you asked that question, because I think, you know, musicians, creative people, you know, you're sort of fine-tuning your ability to feel and to perceive, and then to, you know, kind of distill that down into your art and express it. And right out of the gate, that just means you're sensitive. And that is, vulnerability to me is a superpower, but it is also hard, you know, meaning like, you know, most of us who do art in any medium, we feel a lot. And so, you know, and whether it's the million times you face rejection on, you know, whatever path you're on, or the, you know, the comment online that somebody makes you feel insecure about something you already felt insecure about, it's really easy to let a lot of that stuff in and let it affect you. But I will say, like, you know, there's so many sides to the same, well, I guess there's just two sides to the same coin, but on it, for this specific coin of mental health, it's like music can be such a beautiful place to find peace and serenity and community if you let it. You know what I mean? But I do think it takes intention, and I think we already touched on that a little bit with some of the perspective of the musician, of, you know, wanting to always prove themselves, and that's very human and makes perfect sense. But you know, leading with openness and with love, I think helps a lot. But, you know, for mental health specifically, it's like, it can be a place of safety and expression. But I know for me, I sort of had to, because you know, for what it's worth, and to anybody listening, I mean, myself and most people I know deal with mental health. I mean, mental health is just health. You know, it's just your mind. And we all have had, you know, and however you frame it or think about it is totally valid. But, you know, I've gone through a lot of anxiety and depression, and I have ADHD and OCD, and I've done, you know, work and therapy for all those things and continue to do that. And I love the idea that music can be one part of the equation of wellness, you know, where it's not, I think the only thing I would maybe advise against is making it everything, because, you know, there's going to be times where it lets you down a little bit. No, even if you're a fan, you know what I mean? You can go to a show and have a bad experience and that's not to say you don't, like, you know, it can be church for a lot of people, and for me it has been that thing, and even just finding like-minded people who really understand you, those are all the beautiful parts of it, you know. But I also think it's good to be aware that, you know, wellness or mental health is, you know, it's not just one thing. I think it's got to come from a few different angles, you know. And for me, it's like, you know, and I think this is worth touching on too, in terms of like the music world, is like, you know, there's partying, and that is totally fine, and partying is really fun, and like, you know, we have all had our experiences there. But I find with, especially speaking to musicians or even I guess fans too, it's like, you know, it's important to be aware of what that part of it looks like, and then what degree you want to engage with it, because it's always there and it's always pretty loud if you want it to be. And so, I don't think that like drugs and partying always go hand in hand with mental health, you know, and that's not to say like there's an exception in terms of like the research that's been done on like psilocybin, but there's a difference
that seems
between
a different thing than partying.
Well, right, and it is, you know what I mean? Like if you do like a really intentionally guided safe trip where you're working on things that are tough for you, that's a different thing than me like going to a fish show and dropping a bunch of acid or something. And neither are wrong.
No,
but I think it's important
not to judge.
That's not to judge. But I think it's important for people to maybe have that distinction in mind and know like what they're interacting with and getting out of it, and just trying like, I think the word for me that always comes to mind is just balance, and it's hard to find that, especially in this day and age. Everything, we're so connected to our phones, and we're so connected to like that little dopamine hit of the phone and the notifications and the affirmations or lack thereof on the other side. And, it takes, for me, it's taken a lot of work and a lot of consciousness around how to like stay balanced. And it's not easy. I mean, that's something I'll work on for the rest of my life. And I think most people will. And, of course, there's also the physiological side. Like not everybody has the, levels of some of the stuff, the depression, the anxiety, whatever. But I think everybody does have their own unique version of a struggle that, coming back to everyone's got their sack of rocks. And
great. That's a great
I know. I really love it. I thought that was such a cool way to phrase that. And coming from like an 85-year-old woman who's still just wanting to work and perform and share her art, but also is very ill. And but so, I know for me it's an important part of the conversation just in general moving forward, and to help people like know that, man, going to therapy fucking rules. It's like if you broke your foot, you wouldn't like try to heal it at home by yourself. Like you don't have the tools. And I kind of think of the mind as the same thing. Like we go through these moments that weigh on us too heavy to know what to do with. And it's like, whether someone, passes away, or you go through a really difficult relationship change, or any of the million human things that all of us have or will experience in life at some point. It's like you can't be expected to know what to do with that inherently or how to process it. But there are resources, and there's nothing shameful about giving yourself the best chance of finding peace. And that's how I like to phrase it, because, growing up there was, and I'm sure even more so for you, because it seems to be, I mean, how much older are you than me? Like 15 years? Something like that?
20.
Okay, so 20 years. But even from when I was in my teens, and I'm 33 now, there's a very different tone around mental health conversations. And like even your son and kids his age have a completely different view of it, which is beautiful.
I'm so glad.
But
that's a beautiful thing.
I know a lot of people my age and around my age and older and younger that still feel a lot of discomfort around the notion, and everybody's like just suffering in silence in parallel. And it's like, I want to encourage people to just like, it doesn't have to be like that. And I will say that as a musician, as a performer, that part of things, like I do therapy, I work out a little bit, I skateboard, I've been doing a sober thing, all the stuff has helped me find a better way to approach my art anyway. So if that's your goal, that those things I think can be underestimated sometimes. But for me, their value has been almost immeasurable.
Shout out to therapy for sure, because
love therapy.
I mean, the pandemic, I hit a snag. I've been a very, I think most people did. My story was that, I've always been a pretty positive person, and everyone gets depressed. No one's immune to that. But all of a sudden, it was events that led up to it. And then during the pandemic, I was starting to lose my illusion that most people were generally good. And I've needed that, right? And then, my mother got sick and ultimately passed away during this time. It was a tough time, and it was the first time in my life where music just didn't cure it. And that scared the hell out of me.
Yeah, it's terrifying, right? Because that's the thing.
That's when I turned
like your
to
place.
Therapy. Yeah,
right.
Music was my place. And I'm like, wait, you're taking that too? I can't go outside, and I can't believe my fellow man the way I did, and now I can't have this. And therapy helped me get it back. Like it came back quickly. Yeah. And then I became really prolific, and then music ended up pulling me out of it again, you know? But that scary thing. And it was the first time I'm like, I think this is what people who really have struggled with depression feel like a lot.
Right.
And it gave me empathy, but it also really scared me, you know? And so that, I think some of the idea for this podcast kind of came to me then.
Yeah.
And then I ended up meeting these wonderful people and, you know, making it happen. But it really does matter, and it really can help you if you let it. And I'm glad that you know, Aqueous is an important band to a lot of people, you know, to hear you say that. And these are people who go on tour with bands. These are people who are into the scene, right? You know, by the time this runs, Aqueous will have just presented its second festival, the Great Flamingo, which I know is going to be awesome. I'm saying that now. See, time bend. But anyway, it's important for them, I think, to hear you say that.
Yeah, well, and
to own it.
And I want to just say too, you know, thank you for sharing that and being open, because something I've learned is that there's a lot to be gained in just being human and just you know, saying, yeah, I have flaws, I have struggles, you know, and it helps other people be like, yeah, I do too, and we can all kind of like take a layer off of the masks that we wear to try to present as super great all the time, you know, and which I think is sort of like the aim of a lot of the social media stuff. Like we frame our lives in such a way, and a lot of times it's lacking the context. And you know, it's not that it's not true or real, but it's not the whole picture. Yeah. And what you went through, you know, I mean, those are really difficult things, and I think, like you said, collectively the world sort of being in this pause where you're really faced with whatever is there, and you know, I know I was barely ready to look at it all. You know, I had been touring perpetually for 10,
and all of a sudden stand still,
and then there's just nothing, you know, and except, you know, whatever is going on in your head or in your home or in your heart, and you have to deal with it, you know, and it's not easy to do, but I'm so glad to hear that therapy was of benefit to you, and I'm not surprised. It's you know, it's like, to me, like a roadmap. It's like it's like just an objective perspective, like, because I think we live in a time where you're almost, there's a lot of pressure to just be on all the time and to feel like you have to like present as, you know, knowing, you know, all the answers you got, you know, you're really confident, all those things, and it's like sometimes you just don't know, you know, and you need perspective, and you know, the one thing I think that I hadn't really thought about too before I really started engaging with it is it takes a lot of pressure off of your relationships too, because sometimes, you know, you turn to your friends or your you know, your partner or whoever in life, and there's like a really healthy way to do that where, you know, you want to feel like you have support in your life, but then there's also a point of accountability where it's beyond what those relationships. Here, you hold
my bag of rocks.
Yeah, exactly. Like they can't, because they already have
they
theirs,
got their own bag, you know,
of rocks. Like, I can't carry anymore. And I think I see a lot of people go through this feeling of like, well, then no one cares about me, or like, you know, and that's a horrible thing to feel, of course, but it's also like there are tools and people that can help that process be a lot easier and help you get more clarity, because that's really all we're looking for in those moments. We get lost in the dark or lost in you know, and it's like we need a fucking flashlight. And to me, that's all it is. It's like someone waving the flashlight in the dark and be like, hey, have you tried to look over here? You know, what have you tried this? And it's literally like a lot of modality things, like just genuinely tangible things to try in terms of your mindset, your lifestyle, whatever. And of course it requires a little bit of effort, but everything that's great in life does. And you know, and to come through a time like that and to reconnect with the things that maybe the fire went out for a little bit is a very beautiful feeling, and it's very inspiring. And you know, it's inherent in life that we'll suffer. You know, that's a Buddhism thing. It's like, and they're not wrong. You know, and that's not, you know, me advocating that everybody should become Buddhist. I mean, I like to just learn from anything that seems like it has value.
It certainly has plenty to offer.
Yeah, absolutely. But I always, you know, I think it's good to like just make room for that and be aware of it, but then also honor yourself by doing what's needed to work with it, you know, instead of like white knuckling your way through everything, which is what I was doing for a long time. And there's so many ways to do that I think are pretty normalized. And I think the one thing I notice especially, I mean, it's everywhere, but Buffalo's a drinking city, you know, and I've seen a lot of friends that are, you know, beautiful, beautiful people like really struggle and I've been in that place too. We've talked about that. We did the article in the Buffalo News, and there's a lot of different ways to approach and being well and keeping your mental health together. But and there's no right or wrong way. And I would encourage anybody listening that's thinking about that side of their health or their lives to just be open to whatever it is that they need, and to to try to approach it without shame and with courage, because I think that's what it takes, is courage. It's scary to like approach something you don't know, or that there's a stigma about, or and I think I've really like thought a lot the past few years about the difference between confidence and courage. And there is a difference. Courage is like still being afraid but making the choice anyway. And I think confidence is its own thing. It's like, and I've never really known that. I've known courage.
Right.
But it does, I know for me, it took a lot of courage to even like follow through on making an appointment for a first therapy or something like that. And those things ended up being all the stuff that reconnected me to all of the things I love, including music, Aqueous, expression, Death Kings, that was all a product of me actually tending to my own head and heart, so that I could continue to move forward. So
that's beautiful, man. I'm looking forward to the next 10 years of our friendship, but also the next 10 years of your, continued musical journey.
I appreciate that, man. And me too. And I, it's so nice, like coming from some of the, this perspective, I have not felt this excited about, in two ways. It's like I with this moment with Aqueous, we're taking a break to, honor family and time, and with our guitarist Dave and his wife, they had a baby, and it's just, touring is not, it's not an ideal time,
Right.
for a band our size to go out and tour as much as we would need to when he's got that situation at home. It just didn't line up. And so, you learn, again, coming back to like some of the concepts of letting go of control and just honoring what is, that was very much the right choice. But we are all very close and have a lot of love for each other still. And I'm excited for whatever happens there. But the main thing is what has always been, which is just that we're friends first. But for me, I feel such excitement about all the things I've been quietly working on, and there's a lot of them, and it's all feels very fresh and new and full of joy. And so I'm excited to continue to work from that space and share that with the world, all of that when it's time.
I'm looking forward to it, man. And thank you for your time today, being part of this, and we'll do it again.
And
there's cameras or not, we'll be doing it again.
I feel quite confident about that. Thank you for having me, and it's genuinely a pleasure. I love you, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
I love you back, man. Thanks, Michael.